Greetings to everyone. My name is Karen O'Brien, and I'm a professor at the University of Oslo in Norway. I was selected by the Multidisciplinary Expert Panel of IPBES, or MEP, to be part of a group of experts to assist the MEP with producing a scoping document for a future IPBES assessment on transformative change. This draft scoping report for the Transformative Change Assessment will be considered by the IPBES plenary at its 8th session in June 2021. It is publicly available as document IPBES 8.4. I'm very happy now to present the key features of this scoping report on transformative change. As some background, the IPBES Global Assessment of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, published in 2019, tells us that there are plausible pathways for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity, pathways that are aligned with key human development goals. However, to realize these pathways requires substantial change. It calls for transformative change, which has been defined by IPBES as fundamental, system-wide reorganization across technological and economic and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. And although we hear more and more talk about the need for transformative change, what it actually means and how it comes about in an equitable and sustainable manner remains unclear. The scoping report on transformative change aims to assess different visions and scenarios for a sustainable world for nature and people, and to highlight for decision makers the options for policies and actions to realize them within the context of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Among other things, the objectives are to assess how transformative change occurs, identify what obstacles can impede transformative change, to explore what options for action exist to foster and maintain transformative change toward shared visions of a sustainable world, and to identify which factors in society at all levels can be leveraged to bring about transformative change. This means it needs to consider indirect and direct drivers of change. And just to elaborate a little here, the indirect drivers of change include the formal and informal institutions and the impacts of patterns of production, supply, and consumption on nature, nature's contribution to people, and a good quality of life. Finally, the report will account for the diversity of societal values and behaviors that underpin the indirect drivers. In other words, the motives behind broad societal changes and transitions to inform the design of relevant policies, communication, and engagement campaigns and other actions. In terms of the scope of the report, the assessment will be global, but it will also highlight regional similarities and differences. It will be policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. The assessment will be conducted over 3 years, which positions it well to inform a review of progress towards international commitments. The assessment report will be delivered through the implementation of the 4 functions of the platform. In terms of the policy context, the report will address 10 overarching questions. I won't go through all the questions as they're highlighted in the scoping document, but I do want to emphasize that there are many important policy relevant questions related to transformative change, especially when it comes to the 2050 vision for biodiversity. For example, what are transformative changes and how do they relate to current approaches to managing biodiversity and ecosystem services? How can deliberate and emergent transformative change be used to achieve global objectives? How do different groups envision a sustainable world where the 2050 vision for biodiversity has been achieved in the context of the SDGs? Related to this, what do these visions and the underlying values imply for transformative changes across sectors and systems? Other questions relate to enabling and constraining factors, pathways and obstacles to transformative change, knowledge gaps, and also education and communication strategies, among other things. In the scoping document, the preamble to the chapters emphasize that the assessment aims to capture the very nature of transformative change and the multiple values, knowledge systems, institutions, and choices involved. It's aimed at a broad and diverse audience with many but not all of the intended users specified in the scoping document. The report includes an assessment of multiple values, relevant disciplinary perspectives, knowledge systems, development pathways, and the role of different actors. The preamble also recognizes that transformative change entails trade-offs, choices, synergies, equity impacts, and tensions. Finally, it points out that knowledge gaps will be identified through this assessment. The report will consist of 5 chapters written by an interdisciplinary team of experts. These 5 chapters complement each other, and together they represent a comprehensive assessment that addresses the policy context and the questions I described earlier. Chapter 1 on transformative change and a sustainable world makes the case for transformative changes and explains why such changes are vital to addressing the underlying causes of biodiversity and its drivers through an integrated and synergistic manner. More specifically, it will take stock of the increasing demands for transformative change, explore how addressing the underlying and direct causes of biodiversity loss and nature deterioration, as well as climate change and development inequities, by examining evidence of their increasing and compounding effects and social consequences. It will recognize the trade-offs involved in transformative changes and identify how context, scale, and emergent properties influence and both challenge and create challenges and opportunities. It will in particular reflect on the challenges of transformative change and then explain the assessment rationale by presenting its methodological approach and provide a roadmap for the assessment. Chapter 2 on visions of a sustainable world for nature and people will assess the state of research on collective visions for the future and the kind of institutions, governance mechanisms, and deliberative processes that will have to be undertaken to facilitate transformative change within different settings. Among other things, it will assess how transformative change for nature and people presents specific challenges related to normative ethics, different worldviews, and collective values about visions for a sustainable future. We'll also address mechanisms for inclusion and deliberation to simultaneously consider and reflect different visions within the context of scientific understandings. It will include examples and invoke narratives, stories, and visualizations illustrating visions of a sustainable world, and then assess different visions and values for a sustainable world where the 2050 vision has been achieved. Chapter 3 on how transformative change occurs presents a comparison, synthesis, and assessment of multiple theories and frameworks of transformative change and how they relate to different strategies, policies, and practices. More specifically, it will assess how transformative change occurs, focusing on those changes that can intentionally promote a sustainable world. It will assess theories and frameworks for understanding deliberate transformative change, and included here is attention to how social and cultural norms, values, beliefs, worldviews, and paradigms influence approaches to transformative change. It will consider different approaches to scaling transformative change and assess the normative, ethical, and political dimensions of these. Chapter 3 will emphasize integrated and holistic perspectives in relation to the IPBES conceptual framework, and then also draw attention to representative historical examples and case studies. Chapter 4 on overcoming the challenges of achieving transformative change towards a sustainable world will assess a wide range of constraints, challenges, and obstacles that impede transformative change towards a sustainable world, with a focus on strategies to overcome them in order to advance global, regional, and local visions for a sustainable world for nature and people. These include challenges associated with policy development, implementation, and coherence. It also includes attention to opposition arising from vested public interests and private interests facilitated by weak institutions. It focuses on individual, social, and systemic inertia and the lack of learning. And importantly, it will assess a wide range of literature and case studies providing evidence of how a variety of obstacles have been overcome. This leads us to Chapter 5, which is about realizing a sustainable world for nature and people, transformative strategies, actions, and roles for all. This chapter considers how transformative change might enable diverse visions for a sustainable world and strategies for overcoming challenges towards achieving these visions. The assessment will be situated in reference to the conceptual framework and the obstacles defined in previous chapters, but more specifically, it will emphasize first, institutions. And this includes the design, evolution, and operation for attending to the ongoing dynamic and unpredictable nature of transformative change. Second, it'll focus on instruments, or the policies, tools, methods, norms, options, and actions enabling and encouraging transformative change for a sustainable world. Third, evaluation, with a focus on monitoring and evaluation progress towards the transformative change and towards a sustainable world. And finally, it will emphasize scenarios and pathways, options and actions, including cascades of actions taken by different actors. We'll assess these possible and desirable scenarios and transitional pathways of options over short, medium, and long time horizons. Taken together, the 5 chapters will assess the nature of transformative change and inform subnational, national, regional, and global policies relevant for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems, of natural resources, and of nature's contribution to people. Overall, the report will strengthen the knowledge base for informed, evidence-based decision-making by assessing what we know about the options to implement transformative change in order to achieve the 2050 vision for biodiversity and the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much for listening.